Welcome to the final section of Chapter 10, Section 5. This will look at adolescent problems. In particular, we will talk about juvenile delinquency, depression, and suicide. There is also a section on the interrelation of problems and successful prevention and intervention programs. I do expect you to read that, and I will tell you that there is one question on the next test from that section that I would not be covering. So you should be reading that on your own. So we will start with juvenile delinquency, and we can define a juvenile delinquent as being an adolescent who breaks the law or engages in behavior that is considered illegal. Delinquency rates. Males are more likely to engage in delinquency than females. This has always been true. The gap is narrowing somewhat. More females are joining delinquency caseloads than in past generations, but it's still predominantly, or at least heavily, males are much. Okay, I don't know what I was trying to say. Males are much more likely to be delinquent still than females, even though the female figures have risen. Okay. The rates of minority groups and lower SES youth are especially high. Remember what I said during the last section, that we're looking at, groups that are experiencing the double disadvantage of prejudice and poverty in many cases here. So the higher rates among minority groups, maybe somewhat to that prejudice, but it also may be because they're also lower SES or in poverty growing up, and that may contribute to the delinquency rates. Causes of delinquency, certainly we know that lower SES culture promotes delinquency. Those that live in poverty are more likely to engage in illegal activities and to break the law. I mentioned this during the last section as well. Parents that are less skilled in discouraging antisocial behavior may be somewhat at a cause as well. And we do know that this does occur more in families living in poverty or very low SES circumstances. The parents are less likely to encourage their children to always follow the law. Siblings and delinquent peers can be role models that get copied or imitated, leading to delinquent behavior. Once again, remember that with peer pressure, if a sibling or a peer seems to be of higher status, for instance, an older sibling we may look up to, or a peer that is popular we may look up to, we're more likely to copy their behavior, which may lead to delinquency. Coming from a family where the parents are divorced leads to a higher rate of delinquency, more chance of delinquency. And finally, also a lack of academic success promotes a greater likelihood of delinquency. Those that have more to lose because they're doing well in school and have a brighter future are far less likely to engage in delinquent behaviors compared to those that aren't expecting to go on to higher education or to have some kind of professional career ahead of them. Depression and suicide. Factors contributing to depression. First of all, we know that there is a genetic contribution, but it's a nature plus nurture issue once again, where both genes and environment contribute. So genetics are part of the issue. In some people, depression is just more likely than in other people based on their genetics. The genetics themselves don't cause depression. You don't automatically get depressed because you have certain genes. There always has to be environmental triggers and certain environments that mix with your genetics. So with the genes, you inherit a propensity for a greater or lesser propensity for depression. Certain family factors contribute to depression rates. I'll list a few of them here. Having a depressed parent certainly makes it more likely. Having an emotionally unavailable parent or parents. Um, Emotionally unavailable parents, for instance, if you have parents that are neglectful. Having parents with high marital conflict makes depression more likely. Being around that conflict on a daily basis is really um, harmful as far as mental health goes. And finally, having parents with financial problems is also a contributing factor to depression in adolescence. And then there are also peer relation issues. I'll list a few of them. Not having a best friend. I already mentioned earlier that adolescence is a time where you need at least one close friend in order to meet your social needs. It is somebody just to disclose to be, to speak more intimately with. If you don't have a best friend, it can cause mental health or emotional problems. Having less contact with friends, particularly if it's changed in some way. So maybe you had a certain level of contact and then you lost contact because you started working part time, or your family moved away, or you switched schools or something like that. Uh, Having friends who are depressed um, can contribute to your depression. Once again, our peers and our friends do rub off on us. Right? Their behaviors are we're more likely to adopt similar behaviors. If they're doing behaviors that are making them depressed, we may adopt similar behaviors. And experiencing peer rejection is one more potential cause. Um, no one likes being rejected, and obviously could lead to depression, especially if it happens frequently. As far as treatment of depression, well, there's certainly drug therapy. We are a country that is very much oriented towards drugs and drug therapy. We like our pills, we like easy solutions. And so I would say in the typical case, the first thing your doctor's going to do if you're depressed is to prescribe some kind of antidepressants, such as serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Um, a second possibility, though, is to undergo therapy, such as cognitive behavior therapy, which is very good for depression, or interpersonal therapy. Not, I don't know as much about it compared to cognitive behavior therapy, but I mean, apparently it can have very good outcomes as well. Um, but what we find is that the combination works best. Some form of therapy and you doing drug therapy as well. Some form of insight therapy or talk therapy as well as drug therapy. The drugs help to put put you into a place where you can receive the insight therapy more clearly, and the insight therapy can help you get rid of or to deal with the causes of the depression, so that the drugs eventually become unnecessary. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in 10 to 19-year-olds. We looked at the list earlier. Remember, the first leading cause was accidents, particularly motor vehicle accidents, and the second was homicide. Um, Adolescents contemplate or attempt it unsuccessfully more often than they actually commit it. There are many more failed attempts than successful attempts. Females are more likely to attempt suicide. Males are more likely to succeed. Most people have heard this before and understand it's because males tend to use more lethal means than do females. Females are more likely to attempt suicide using pills and drugs, which are less successful than doing something like using a gun, for instance. Females tend not to want a messy suicide, whereas males care much less about that. So they are more successful. Some risk factors for suicide are listed here. Um, I don't really need to go through these too much. Certainly a history of family instability. If you have other mental health problems running through your family, it makes depression more likely. A lack of supportive friendships. I've talked about the importance of friendships in adolescence for mental health issues. Your well-being is very much depends on having at least one good friend. Cultural context can influence depression rates. Genetic factors as well. Some people are more prone for depression and suicide than others. And I know sometimes I've been saying depression here instead of suicide, but they're so linked. This final point is important that depression is the most frequently cited factor associated with adolescent suicide, more than any other factor. I mean, it is depression that causes the most attempts and the most completed suicides. Um, so the things that cause depression are also the same risk factors for suicide. And that concludes chapter 10. Remember, there is a final section that you are to read on your own.